In the world of mixed martial arts, where heroes are cheered and villains are booed, there is a figure who challenges that entire narrative. Sylvia, a man who, despite his impressive height and fighting skills, never managed to win the hearts of the fans. This is the story of a giant who conquered the UFC heavyweight title, not just once but twice, and still ended up becoming the most hated champion in the history of the organization. Why? Come with me on this journey to find out how a fighter who should have been a legend became a pariah in his own sport. Sylvia was born in Ellsworth, Maine, a place that's not exactly known for producing wrestling champions. From a young age, he stood out because of his height and his imposing physique. But he didn't have the typical path of a high-level athlete. He didn't come from a prestigious wrestling background, and he didn't have Olympic dreams. On the contrary, he was a regular guy who spent his nights lifting weights and training in local gyms. He didn't have sports scholarships, nor a bright future ahead of him. All he had was a burning desire to prove everyone wrong. In 2001, Sylvia began to make noise on the regional MMA circuits. With a very unorthodox fighting style, he started racking up knockouts like they were candy. He was a giant, and not just in terms of height, he was also terrifying. His striking was powerful, and his presence inside the octagon was undeniable. People began to pay attention, and in 2002, he made his UFC debut, where he destroyed Wesley Carrera in a performance that left everyone with their mouths open. The real turning point came in 2003, when he faced Rico Rodriguez, the UFC heavyweight champion at that time, at UFC 41. Sylvia brought Rodriguez down with a series of devastating punches, and just like that, the UFC had found its new champion. But the crowd's reaction was surprisingly cold. Instead of cheers and celebration, fans were left wondering, is this guy really the champion? His appearance and fighting style didn't match the image of a heroic figure. He didn't have the look of a superhero, and the way he spoke lacked charisma. Even though he became champion, Sylvia didn't enjoy the recognition he thought he deserved. In his mind, being the champion meant everything, even if no one else agreed. The pressure of being the face of the heavyweight division began to weigh heavily on him. The UFC was in a period of rapid growth, and what the fans wanted were charismatic heroes who could sell fights, not just win titles. Sylvia's life as champion quickly turned into a nightmare. After defending his title against Gan McGee at UFC 44, he tested positive for steroids. He didn't hide behind excuses. He openly admitted that he used them to lose weight, not to gain an unfair advantage. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The Nevada State Athletic Commission suspended him and stripped him of his belt. He went from being the champion to being the guy with a giant asterisk next to his name. The controversy only added fuel to the fire of the dislike many already felt toward him. Sylvia wasn't exactly the most popular guy to begin with, and the failed steroid test gave his critics even more ammunition. Dana White, the UFC president, is not the kind of person who just lets something like that slide. Sylvia became the heavyweight champion nobody wanted, in a division that already lacked big stars. It was brutal. Despite the controversy, Sylvia didn't disappear. After recovering from a horrific arm break suffered in a fight against Frank Mir, he had a shot at redemption in 2006. He faced Andrei Arlovski once again at UFC 59. Even though Arlovski dropped him early in the fight, Sylvia got back up and knocked him out cold. The belt was his once again, but the public's reaction remained the same. The fans still weren't convinced. Sylvia was a dominant heavyweight. He had long reach, a deadly jab, and solid takedown defense. But he couldn't sell a pay-per-view event, not even if you gave away a free pizza with every purchase. It was like being on the honor roll at school and still getting punished. Sylvia was winning fights, but nobody cared. He wasn't celebrated, he was merely tolerated. That's a strange position to be in when you're wearing the UFC gold around your waist. If you're a UFC champion and the crowd greets you with boos, something has clearly gone wrong. The main event at UFC 68 marked a crucial moment in Sylvia's career. He stepped into the octagon to face Randy Couture, a beloved fighter who had come out of retirement to challenge him. On paper, Sylvia was the favorite. He was the reigning champion. He was younger, bigger, and stronger. But the crowd was there to support one man, and it wasn't Tim Sylvia. At 43 years old, Couture stepped into the cage, ready to show that he still had what it takes. The fight began, and within seconds, Couture landed a punch to Sylvia's face. From that moment on, Sylvia was completely dominated. Couture took him down, pressured him, and controlled him for all 5 rounds. Sylvia looked flat, confused, and totally outmatched. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a full-blown humiliation. The crowd erupted with joy every time Couture landed a strike, while Sylvia looked stuck in slow motion, as if the fight was happening around him and not to him. After the fight, Sylvia felt completely crushed. He said, "I felt like I let everyone down, mostly myself." That quote hit hard. You could see it had broken him. Not just the loss, but the way everything had unfolded. Couture became the darling of the sport, while Sylvia became the guy who had embarrassed the UFC. Sylvia's career didn't just decline after the Couture fight, it nosedived. In 2008, he faced Fedor Emelianenko, a legend of the sport, in a fight that many expected to be his triumphant comeback. Instead, Sylvia was knocked out in just 36 seconds. That moment became a meme, one that overshadowed everything else he had accomplished in his career. From being a 2-time UFC champion, he became the guy who was knocked out by a retired boxer. The public's perception of him changed drastically. He was no longer remembered as the fighter who had defeated Arlovski twice. He was now the guy who got dropped by a guy who had already left the sport. The fall was steep and incredibly painful. After the fight against Fedor, Sylvia left the UFC. He was frustrated with fighter pay and the lack of respect he felt he received. He wanted more freedom, more fights, more recognition, but what he got instead were smaller venues, bizarre matchups, and some brutal outcomes. Sylvia's post-UFC record was disheartening, 7 wins and 6 losses. The names of his opponents weren't exactly a list of top-tier fighters. He fought guys like Jason Riley, Mariusz Pudzianowski, and Paul Buentello. Most of those fights flew under the radar. However, there was one fight that stood out. On June 13, 2009, at Adrenaline MMA 3, Sylvia stepped into the cage to face Ray Mercer, a 48-year-old former boxing champion with no MMA experience whatsoever. The plan was simple. Tim would throw a punch, take him down, and win easily. But what actually happened was an absolute disaster. Mercer threw a punch, and Sylvia collapsed, knocked out in just 9 seconds. The internet had a field day. A former UFC champion turned into a punching bag in the blink of an eye. The image of Sylvia, a giant being dropped by an older man, became a symbol of his fall from grace. Despite his achievements, Tim Sylvia was never truly seen as one of the greats. His victories were overshadowed by his awkward fighting style and his lack of charisma. However, years later, some analysts began to reevaluate his legacy. Maybe, just maybe, Sylvia was a pioneer in a sport that wasn't ready yet for a champion who didn't fit the mold. Sylvia finished with 31 victories, 9 of them inside the UFC, and 3 successful title defenses, tying Randy Couture for the most heavyweight title fights in UFC history.